Welcome. If you are looking for Desert Water Agency's electoral map public workshop, you are in the right place. If not, you may want to stick around anyway because it'll be some exciting stuff here. We're going to give folks just a moment or two to get settled. While we do that, I can give you an idea of what we're in for this evening. I'll be covering some brief introductions, some housekeeping about Zoom and how the proceedings will take place. We will be going into an election by division overview, talking a bit about the 2020 census results in our area, looking at our current electoral map and then the draft maps that our demographers have developed. We'll be taking some public comments and Q&A, and then we'll be talking about how you can continue to be involved in the process. So it looks like we're up to about 13 folks. Not sure how many we anticipate, but we're gonna, out of respect for your time this evening, go ahead and move along and welcome any people as they join later. So this meeting is being recorded. That being said, you know, we don't necessarily see you at home unless you are sharing your camera with us voluntarily here. And you are on mute, just so that we don't have issues with background noise or disruption. If you need to take a phone call or step out or go grab a cup of water, what have you, you're welcome to do so. We will unmute for Q&A, and if you just let us know by raising your hand. And in Zoom, it's a little bit tricky. It's not super intuitive. If you go down and you hit reactions, you should have the ability to raise and lower your hand. So if, for example, if you have a question, raise your hand, and if someone else asks the same question and you no longer wish to ask your question, you can lower your hand. You can also ask us questions in the chat or ask us for technical support in the chat. You can add your email in the chat. That will help us stay in contact with you. In the event that we have any updates about this process, it would be very helpful if you put your email address in the chat. We want to make sure we're able to stay in touch with everyone and keep everyone up to speed about this really important process. And there will be a quick poll at the end. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and do some quick introductions. We have two Desert Water Agency board members with us. We have our board vice president, Mr. Jim Chiaffi, on the line, as well as Pat Oygar, our longest serving director. And we also have our two fearless leaders here. We have Mark Kraus, our general manager, and Steve Johnson, our assistant general manager. And we also have Xochitl Pena, who is our outreach specialist and is doing a lot of work behind the scenes here. So she may be interfacing with you in the chat as well. And then we have our experts from BB&K. We've got our general counsel, Mike Riddell, who is the best attorney I've ever had the privilege of working with. And then Todd Leishman, who I've just met this evening, but is fantastic. He's been a partner with BB&K for 8 years. He's got years of election experience as well. He's got 4 redistricting projects underway right now, several of which are with special districts in Southern California. So very helpful. So I'm going to kick it off to Todd so he can talk to you a little bit about the background of this process.
Thank you, Ashley. I'll say this. Desert Water has a great reputation for having a great staff. And I did review the last workshop that was held previously on an afternoon, and very impressed. I should clarify, in case anybody is fact-checking me, I am a partner at BB&K, and I have been with the firm for 8 years, but I haven't been a partner that whole time. So I enjoy being a partner at the firm very much because I like my colleagues. But as to division-based elections, we're having this conversation because there are 3, I'll call it 4 layers of law that lead us to this point. The first is the US Constitution. And in particular, the 14th Amendment, which when it did away with the 3/5 compromise, ensures that or guarantees that every person, every whole person gets a vote, a whole vote. And so that principle of one person, one vote comes from the US Constitution. That's buttressed really by the Federal Voting Rights Act, which likewise requires one person, one vote. And it does that by requiring roughly equal populations in voting districts, or in this case, voting divisions. Then there's also the California Voting Rights Act, which is very similar in its requirements, though I should say that the Federal Voting Rights Act and the California Voting Rights Act don't just ensure or require that we ensure one person, one vote with equal populations, but also they're really focused on ensuring that minority populations have a voice. So we look for majority-minority divisions when we can. And then there's also another layer, which isn't listed here, of traditional legal principles, which we might touch on in a bit. As many of you already know, Desert Water transitioned to divisions in 2019. If it seems like we were just here, we just did this, that's true, you did. But in the 2019 transition to divisions relied on the only census data that was available at the time that came from 2010. And the US Constitution and these other laws require us to do it again every time there's a new census. So with the 2020 census in hand, we're now revisiting it to see what changes, if any, are needed for the district's current divisions. Next slide, please. So what are the 2020 census results? 8% growth overall. You can see the difference there between the roughly 89,000 in the 2010 census to the almost 97,000 in the latest census. Division, a lot of population growth happened, I believe, north of the I-10 is where it landed. There was, yeah, it's right there at the bottom, isn't it? There was little to no net growth, as you can see down in Palm Springs, because that was largely built out in the first place, but 25% of that growth came from Desert Hot Springs. Next, please. So we're going to take a quick look at the current map. This is an interactive map, which is nice, but these division boundaries should be pretty familiar to you. And people sometimes note that, well, why aren't they the same size? Well, that's because population density differs in those areas. We really have to equalize population. And so those smaller divisions, of course, have more people in them. That's why they're balanced out by these larger areas that have fewer people per mile or per acre. Next. We can go back and look at the draft maps. Our demography team prepared 2 maps just based on the census. Nobody's locked into these 2, but it's kind of to start the conversation. And the first map, could we overlay the existing district boundaries? Thank you. The existing boundaries you can see in black, and then draft map number 1. You can see how down below there's a little bit of suggested change with this map, but not a whole lot. The bigger changes happen up above, where most of that population growth landed. And on that same one, can we, actually, I don't know if map option 2 is up, is it? Can we get that a try? There we go. And here you can see map option 2 also overlaid on top of the existing districts. Again, the biggest changes are up north because that's where the population grew. And down south, we've got some little adjustments. If it's possible, let's see if what it looks like if we toggle 1 and 2, and we can undo the current if it's too busy. You can kind of see, well, the darker areas are what's in common, right? Ashley, if you're driving, could you toggle map 2 off and on a couple times? There, if we keep watching, we can kind of see what changes when she turns on map 2. And if people have particular questions about what either of these maps do, we can always drill in. But for right now, let's go back to the slideshow.
I think one important thing to note as well is if you're looking at our existing divisions, the election in 2019 took care of divisions 4, where my cursor is, and 5 in the south of the map. Divisions 1, 2, and 3 are currently represented by board members at large.
Thank you for noting that. And of course, that just is a result of having transitioned to divisions so recently in 2019. There haven't been 2 full term cycles to transition the entire board yet. Where are we? We're moving through this kind of fast. Okay. I think that might be it for my part.
I think so. I think we really appreciate your expertise in driving us through this. And I'm sure some of these questions that we get will be fielded your way. So don't go too far. I'm going to keep an eye here on our attendees. If you would like to ask a question, if you could use the function to raise your hand, that would be extremely helpful. Or to give a comment. And just know that we're looking for feedback on communities of interest, comments on the draft maps that our demographer developed, any suggestions for mapping. And we just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes if you can. So right now I'm not seeing any raised hands. I am seeing something in the chat, so I'm going to check on that. We've asked about keeping the maps on the screen. Okay, so someone has requested that we keep the maps on the screen. So I'm going to go back one slide. That way we can have these maps up while we're getting comments and questions here.
What was it, this slide with these maps, or was it the more interactive map that the requester was referring to?
It might have been. I'll leave that to him to raise his hand and chat a little further. I do have one gentleman who would like to speak, and I saw his hand go up first. So Sochi, would you please unmute Mr. David Friedman?
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you to you, the DWA team and BBK for the presentation. A couple of practical questions. I didn't see what's your deadline for submitting draft maps. And then I noticed, because I had not seen this, particularly with my experience in Palm Springs, that in draft map 1, proposed district, I believe 1, that starts in Palm Springs, wraps around, there's a non-contiguous area, although arguably it's contiguous with the interruption of, I guess, the Garnett area. So is that kind of map, that's okay, even though at least they're not actually contiguous? So I think those were my practice. Oh, and one more question. Who are the directors who are, theoretically, who are the at-large and who are the directors representing districts 4 and 5? I believe I'm in district 4 with Mr. Ortega, but if you could answer those questions, thank you.
Very good questions. So I'll try and take them chronologically. In terms of the deadline, we anticipate holding an adoption hearing on March 15th at our regularly scheduled board meeting. The legislative deadline is April 17th. So we do have a little bit of wiggle room if we needed to make any adjustments, but ideally, if you are planning to submit a draft map, we'd love for you to have it to us at least a week before March 15th so that we have adequate time to include it in our materials. And frankly, the sooner the better.
Okay.
So if you're working on something, we'd really love to see it, within the next 2 weeks would be the most helpful. That being said, understand it takes time and attention, and we'll be willing to take comments and draft maps up to the day of the public hearing.
Okay.
With regard to your second question about contiguity, I'll defer to Todd if he wants to add anything, but yes, this area right here, it is considered contiguous because it's just separated by that waterway. Todd, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, that's it. It looks a little funny like that just because of the jurisdictional boundaries and the intervening waterway.
And then I believe your last question was about the current representation. So if you look at our existing districts here, this large district that spans down is Division 4, and that is Paul Ortega, who was elected in 2020. And then Division 5, which includes the Cathedral City Cove here, is our board president, Kristen Bloomer, who was elected in 2020 as well. The remainder of the board, including Pat Oygar, Jim Chiaffi, and Joe Stewart, serve at large presently. And those are the 3 seats in the northern area. Will be up for election in November of 2022.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And with that, let me see if we've got any other hands up here. It looks like a Mr. Paul Merritt. I'll be unmuting you momentarily. I've asked you to unmute, so you're going to have to, there you go.
Oh, hello, directors and staff. Thank you for your detailed presentation. I'm having difficulty following the different map insertions. My curiosity is, what is the general population census for districts 1, 2, and 3? I realize some are much larger and probably because it's fewer populated, but how do they contrast per population per district compared to the districts 4 and 5?
So all of the districts have the roughly 19,000 folks in them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all population balanced with a very small discrepancy of I believe it's, Todd, less than 10% differential, less than 5% perhaps.
Yeah, it's actually a less than 10% spread between the very lowest and the very highest.
Thank you.
All right, another question. Unmute you, Paul Henriksen. Hope I haven't butchered your name there.
Ashley, you did it well, as you always do. Thank you. My question is, when the demographers were adjusting for the census blocks to make these changes, one of the comments that came up was communities of interest. I was wondering what they defined as communities of interest and how they made their decisions of the adjustments in the lines. And secondly, what do you think the general public should be most focused on in this process that's most relevant and crucial for their understanding? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for attending yet again. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here. So in terms of communities of interest, you'll see on my screen that I've ticked a box here that says Palm Springs neighborhoods. The organized neighborhoods of Palm Springs were something that we directed the demographers to consider when redrawing these lines. We wanted to keep the neighborhoods intact to the best of our ability. The other direction that we gave them with communities of interest was something that we heard during the 2019 redistricting process, which was that the stakeholders from Cathedral City asked that they remain together in the same division. They did not want to be split into 2 different divisions. So those were the communities of interest that were considered when drawing these 2 draft maps. That being said, if you have any additional feedback about what you feel should be considered in addition to those, we would welcome that feedback now via email, at a future board meeting, or at the hearing. And then I see your hand is still up, Paul. I'm going to unmute you again.
Okay, now I should be unmuted. I muted and unmuted myself too many times there. So sure, I understand the part about the neighborhood organizations, and I do appreciate that because I've been involved in that quite a bit. So the general public, what are our biggest concerns that you think we should be paying attention to in this process? Is there a different type of water service to these areas? Is some getting Delta, some getting Colorado River? I'm just asking questions because I don't know the answers to them. I'm just kind of throwing them out there.
Absolutely. So, during this process, there are two distinctions in terms of the types of folks that get to vote in this election. So Desert Water Agency, our jurisdiction, which these divisions cover our entire 325 square mile jurisdiction, there's a retail service area, and we provide water service to those folks so that when they turn the tap on, when they use their washing machine, when they irrigate their plants, that's water that we have pumped from the groundwater basin or diverted from a stream and are serving to the community. We have customers that are recycled water customers in that area as well. And then we have our larger jurisdiction, which encompasses a much grander area, including the area north of the freeway, that has folks that either are, on a well, they're doing private pumping, or they are part of Mission Springs Water District. So those folks, their votes count equally, regardless of if they get water provided by Desert Water Agency or Mission Springs Water District. They have been voting in our elections since our agency incorporated that area into its boundaries. So that isn't something different. What is a bit different is that now we will have 2 members of the board that are representative of the Desert Hot Springs community by fact of living in those communities, residing in those communities. Whereas before, the board represented them because they were voted into office by the entire jurisdiction. That's kind of the nuance here with these district elections, is everyone's going to get a representative that essentially lives near them. So Paul, I'm going to ask you to unmute just to make sure that I've answered your question to your satisfaction.
Very well done. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. And then the next hand I saw was Mr. Steve Grasha. I'm going to unmute you.
Is that it? Did I make it? Good. Hi, I wanted to refer you to an email that I sent that describes what I believe to be an argument for a community of interest that I live in, that it should be maintained similar to the people in Cathedral City and the arguments that they made, that my neighborhood be included in the Desert Hot Springs districts. I think that this is the first real election where this is going to have the what's likely to happen is you're going to have 3 new directors, and it's probably a good thing at this point when we look at accessibility and the things that we look for in our leadership in Palm Springs and the Desert Hot Springs area. We share a common interest, and that is that our directors truly reside in our district, that their interest is in our district, and that they're accessible to people that have an interest in water service in the Coachella Valley and the Desert Water Agency. We're not getting that now. We will get that in the future. And the question is really at this point, are we going to have 3 new directors, or are we going to have 2 new directors? I would submit to you that it would be an uncomfortable change in leadership at the water agency. If you had three, it might shift confidence, if you will, in some staff members that rely on a consistent board. And I want this board to, I want the staff to know that, and I've said this at two previous board meetings, I'm not part of any group coming over the hill to try to take over an agency. In fact, my comments here tonight are meant to protect the agency. And you can do that by...
Mr. Gracia? Mr. Gracia, if I may, just for a moment.
Oh, go ahead, sure.
So we really have to focus on the constitutional and statutory criteria for drawing these lines. So and way down in that stack is communities of interest, well after, one person, one vote, racial minority voice, topography, geography, compactness, all that stuff. Down at the bottom is communities of interest. If you could focus your comments on that, because we really can't talk about the incumbents or their performance or some of what you were alluding to. We need to stay focused on the community of interest or those other constitutional and statutory standards, if that's okay.
And I appreciate your interest in protecting your employers, but let me explain something to you.
I'm actually just trying to follow the statutory requirements.
And it's not working. I came here with a white flag in my hand, and right now, as you speak, the color of that flag is changing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Gracia. I appreciate it. I have the email that you've sent, and we are reviewing that. We also have the draft map that you sent, and you were the first one to get a map in. So we really appreciate that you took the time to do that. And if you're not limited to just one, so that's something to note for everybody, that if you would like to submit a second or third map, you can submit as many as your heart desires. We really appreciate that. And then I see another hand up, Mr. Friedman, so I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you. I'm just following up on the communities of interest. Obviously, I know the Palm Springs and the neighborhoods group, and you can see where the Cathedral City Cove area is just because it's outside of the layered showing of Palm Springs neighborhoods. Would it be possible to add with your GIS folks maybe one or two different layers? One would be the Desert Hot Springs city boundaries. Because by showing the neighborhood groups in Palm Springs, you have shown essentially the Palm Springs boundaries, at least the populated areas. And probably also relevant would be the Mission Springs Water District service boundaries. So those would be, for me at least, because I'm not familiar with those areas, so that I could draw a map that I thought might reflect communities of interest north of the freeway, outside of the populated areas of Palm Springs. That would help me to make sure that at least I was aware of those potential communities of interest were I to draw a map. Well, I will be drawing a map, and those those additional layers would assist me. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that's a great suggestion. And I was remiss in my remarks about communities of interest that they did take into consideration city boundaries as well. So I will take your comments to our demographers, and that sounds like something that's very feasible. And there was also two things I didn't mention specifically. We provide sewer service only in Cathedral City, so that's another thing to consider as to why Cathedral City may be even more of a community of interest there. And then we do provide some non-potable water service in the Whitewater area. So just two other things to note, little complexities here and there. Then Mr. Friedman, I see your hand is still up, so I'm going to give you another opportunity. Perhaps I didn't answer your question.
Sorry about that. You did answer the question.
Oh, wonderful.
And I just needed to lower my hand, but thank you.
No worries. And then anyone else, any questions, concerns, thoughts? Really appreciate the thoughtful suggestions here. It looks like Mr. Duncan has a question. He is manually raising his hand, so I'm going to unmute him.
I'm sorry, I've been looking for the raise your hand button for
20 minutes. No worries.
I can't find it.
Waving frantically worked well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Do any of your existing or current, I should say, at-large members live in this large area that wraps or includes Desert Hot Springs to the north and then into Palm Springs to the south?
Yes, so we do have directors that live in Division 1 on our current map.
You do? Okay. All right, perfect. Thank you. That's all I had.
Yes, sir. All righty. Any other questions? Even if you've taken a bite at the apple, feel free to raise your hand again. We're all welcoming for our serial questioners here. All right. Well, seeing none, I'm going to move on. I'll keep my eyes peeled for questions in case they pop up. I'm going to skip us forward here on our presentation. So hopefully this isn't making anyone dizzy here. All right, so we've got a mapping tool. Sochi is going to be so kind as to put this link to the mapping tool in our chat. That way you have the opportunity to review a video and to go to this mapping tool website, and step by step, it will walk you through how to submit your own map. And the wonderful thing about it is you can balance it by population, you can try different things. As I mentioned earlier, you can publish as many maps as you'd like. And there's not only video instructions on how to use this tool, but there's also written instructions on how to use the tool. And if all else fails, please feel free to give me a call. And even if I can't help you, I have expert resources at BB&K Election Services. Todd and Mike's colleague, Stephanie Smith, their Director of Election Services, has helped people with mapping and knows how to use this tool very well. So we have lots of resources available to you. If you're having technical difficulties, we can even do a Zoom and we can help you one-on-one. The tool's not as user-friendly as we'd like it to be, but it is a vast improvement on what we were able to offer last time. So technology with this is getting better, and we love the engagement and the opportunity for you to submit maps that have meaningful population data behind them. So hopefully you see those items popping up in the chat. And so just a little background on the process here, so you have an idea of what's on the horizon. Everything in the gray at the top is stuff that we've been through, including today's workshop, February 9th. So next on the docket here, we have board meeting updates. Our next board meeting on February 15th, there will be a discussion item regarding electoral maps and these public workshops. And then I imagine on the March 1st board meeting, there may be another item. And then March 15th is the planned public hearing. So again, all of that feedback, as Mr. Friedman asked, it would be nice to have it in advance of the hearing, but we will take it up to the hearing itself. But again, the sooner the better there. And then we must adopt a map by April 17th. So let's say we get some really meaningful, impactful feedback at the hearing on March 15th. There's still a couple opportunities for our board to meet and adopt a map at a later date if need be. And these maps will be used in the November 22 election. And we will have new board members installed in late 2022. So how can you get involved? Well, you've made it this far. You're with us on a Wednesday night at 6:34 p.m. So kudos to you for taking the time during dinner hour to be here with us. You can check out our website. We'll put a link to that in the chat as well, dwa.org/divisions. And just for some background, cities typically refer to this process as districting or redistricting. You may have even heard me or Todd mention that. We use the term divisions because we're a special district, so it can get a little bit confusing. So we refer to them as divisions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You're welcome to send us any questions and feedback at divisions@dwa.org. Submit 1 or 5 or 10 or 15 maps, as many as you'd like. Attend a future workshop. We don't have one slated yet. That will depend on board feedback that we receive at the next board meeting. So it's possible that there will be future workshops, but certainly at the next board meetings, we will be discussing these items. So our board meets February 15th at 8 a.m., March 1st at 8 a.m., and March 15th at 8 a.m. So any of those would be great opportunities to provide feedback. Consider a run for office. Maybe this is why you're on the call. Maybe you're interested in elected office and serving your community and learning more about water. And then vote in November, especially, some of the folks on the call, like Mr. Friedman mentioned, he's in Division 4. He won't be able to vote, unfortunately. But for those of you that reside in the northern area of Palm Springs and Desert Hot Springs, vote and be a part of the process. And thank you again so much for attending. So I'm going to open it up one last time because you guys have all been so prompt and courteous with your comments that we have an opportunity if you'd like to ask any more questions. So looking for some hands here. And I do see a hand by Mr. David Friedman. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can. Sochi, can you unmute David Friedman, please?
I may email you, Ashley and Sochi. I've logged on because I had submitted a Palm Springs map, so I already have a Dave's account, and I'm having trouble figuring out where I need to find the DWA map to work on. So I may just ask you for some guidance on that, because when I click on home, there isn't an obvious place that's allowing me to find the DWA map. So I want to pick a state. So you may need to, I may need to get some, you might want to give some additional guidance on your website. Because I think I click on the FAQ where it says click here, and that's where I went to the year and I logged on, but I'm not seeing DWA, at least in an obvious place.
So the video that we have the link to in the chat, and there's an instructional document on our website, but there is a search tool in Dave's. And if you go to the search tool and type in DWA, you should be able to find that map.
Okay, new map, new community. All right, I won't hold you up. I may ask for some help directly. I'll fool around with it this evening and let you know if I need to do that. Can you resend the link, the mapping tools again, where the video is? There it is. There. Okay, fine. I am clicking on it. I'm clicking on the tool there.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I'd be happy to do a one-on-one session with you at your convenience. So shoot me an email tomorrow if you're still having any difficulty.
Great, thanks. All right, I found the video. Thank you very much.
This short video is intended.
Wonderful. And then it looks like we have another hand up. So I'm going to ask Paul to unmute.
Thank you, Ashley. This is going to seem like a bit of a naive question, but what motivates someone to want to run for the board as a division or district representative? And to be clear, I'm not interested. That's not why I'm asking. You know Bob, he'd be very upset with me if I did such a thing. But I am wondering what motivates people to want to run for the board, and if there are things that could preclude someone from running from the board. I learned at the last meeting that there really wasn't a residency requirement, just a voter registration within the district as a requirement. That kind of sent up a red flag, and it made me curious what's going on. If you could try your best to address it, that may be tough to address. Thank you.
Absolutely. So folks do have to sign paperwork with the county registrar indicating that they are a resident of the district that they are running in. So that is a requirement. Now, you know, is there an exhaustive background check or, you know, something like that? We don't go through that effort. The county registrar doesn't typically go through that sort of an effort, but could it come to a head? Certainly. So, you know, there are past cases where people have gotten in trouble for running for office where they are not a resident. So certainly something to be advised of. Now, what would motivate someone to run for the water agency board? Now, personally, I find what we do extremely exciting and nuanced and challenging. And there are people out there that really enjoy that type of public service. And those are the types of people that we're looking for. There are people who want to have feedback on sustainability, on future investments. Water is really the foundation of our community in the Coachella Valley. And if we don't manage it wisely, there's not a bright future for this community. So that is, I think, the biggest draw. Now, there are also some benefits for people on the board of directors. They are able to get stipends for attending meetings, because these are people that are taking time out of their busy lives and often taking time off of work to participate in meetings. So it is a bit of a lift, because you have to attend meetings that are hours and hours long, several times a month. And, there are committees as well that you can dedicate your time and energy and expertise to. But it's just like any elected office. It's some people have that in their blood and others don't. Sorry to hear that it's not something of interest to you this time around. Maybe once you think about it further. But, that may be a good question for elected officials. So the information to contact them about, why they serve, what they have found most rewarding about those positions would be great. And their contact information is on our website, really easy to find. If you go to Board of Directors, there's an email address for each one of them there. So with that, it looks like I'm going to ask Mr. Grasha to unmute.
Thank you. To follow up on a question of one of the other community members, I recommend that you tune into the upcoming meeting at the Mission Springs Water District. During director's comments, I'll have a more thorough discussion where I'm sure I won't be interrupted by the Mr. Leishman, is it? And we'll go into this and try to explain exactly the history of what's going on here and why the people of Desert Hot Springs have been disenfranchised for 60 plus years, and how this election will be rectifying that. I recommend that you look on the district website, mswd.org, find the meetings tab and tune in, and it is on Zoom, just like this meeting is, so you can participate similar to what we're doing here. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ashley, for your comments about the reasons why people might be able to participate and want to be able to run. It is a thoroughly engaging subject, and people just don't get it. I started my path in this water industry in the Coachella Valley in the 1980s when I created the first misting system that you see. I installed nearly 10,000 of them in the Coachella Valley and around the world. And nobody knows more about increased salinity and its effects on industry and our environment than I do. And so I'm looking forward to having you guys follow us at mswd.org and check into our board meetings as well. It's going to be a very interesting 6 months, I promise you, and you will all learn a great deal. I thank you very much, Ashley.
Thank you, Mr. Grasha. We appreciate that. And I do plan to attend the next Mission Springs Water District board meeting to give a brief update about where we are in this process. So with that, I'm going to unmute Mr. Friedman.
Sorry to leave my hand up. I'm still having some trouble. I'll email you this evening. I'll watch the video and then email you, and we'll find a time in the next few days for me to get a little bit of one-on-one to find DWA there.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Happy to help. And I'm sorry it's not more user-friendly. It's a very powerful tool, and it's used by a lot of different cities and counties and districts, but yeah, they have some work to do with user experience. So it is the same tool, thankfully, that the city of Palm Springs is using. So at least you have familiarity there.
Yeah, I had the same issues there, but it's
sure.
Yeah, we'll work on it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, with that, I would like to thank everyone for sticking around and let you know that we're here to help. So please do reach out if you need anything. We've got some great resources in the chat. So hopefully you've taken the time to kind of copy and paste those out. But if you haven't, those documents are all available on our website. So with that, I'm going to close out and allow you all to return to your regularly scheduled programming. Thank you.